The train shrieked like some iron beast, exhaling steam into the pale afternoon air. Dust swirled across the platform, curling around the hem of Eliza May Turner's faded dress. She clutched her small suitcase against her chest, as though it carried not cloth and ribbon, but the very fragments of her courage. At 18, she was still slight of frame, her face caught between girlhood and womanhood, cheeks flushed with both heat and trembling anticipation. Behind her, the station bustled with travelers and gawkers, the air thick with the scent of coal smoke, leather saddles, and the faint perfume of lilacs carried from a vendor's basket. Yet all Eliza could hear was her own heartbeat, knocking like a frantic drum as she imagined the life waiting for her in this raw frontier. The townsfolk noticed her before her groom did. Whispers rippled through the cluster of women gathered near the depot steps, their parasols shading eyes that lingered on the newcomer. "So young," one murmured. "Barely out of girlhood," said another. Mrs. Hester Clay, the oldest of them, narrowed her eyes as if squinting through sin itself. "Mail order, they say. Folks back east sending lambs into a wolf's country. Shameful." The words reached Eliza's ears like burrs carried on the wind, pricking deep. She lifted her chin, though her grip on the suitcase whitened her knuckles. Then he appeared, Jedediah Coulter. He was larger than she had imagined from the letter, thick around the middle, with a mustache stained from tobacco and sweat soaking through the armpits of his best shirt. He walked with the weary swagger of a man who owned land and cattle enough to make himself important, yet his eyes darted about, restless, as though expecting ridicule even before he reached her. He stopped, looking her up and down with a scowl that soured the air between them. "You're the one." His voice carried, loud enough for half the platform to hear. "This can't be right." He circled her as if assessing livestock. "You're a slip of a thing. Too young for ranch work, too young for a wife. What fool thought this a match worth the postage?" Heat flamed across Eliza's cheeks. The stares of strangers felt like brands pressed into her skin. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Jed's laughter, hard, bitter, cut the silence. "I ordered a woman, not a child still playing at dresses." He spat on the ground, turned to the onlookers as though inviting their approval, and barked, "I won't be made a mockery." The crowd's murmurs swelled into a tide. Some smirked, others pitted. Mrs. Clay clucked her tongue, whispering, "Told you too young." Eliza's chest constricted, her breath shallow, shame pooling heavy in her belly. She wanted to vanish into the smoke, into the boards beneath her shoes. Instead, she stood, trembling, while Jedediah Coulter strode away, as though discarding nothing more than a defective plow. From the crowd stepped Sarah, Eliza's older sister, her hair pinned neatly, though the journey had left lines of weariness around her eyes. Sarah had followed not for herself, but for Eliza's safety. Now, as she watched her sister crumble beneath the weight of public humiliation, she drew a steady breath and placed a hand upon Jed's sleeve. "Sir," she said softly, her voice steady despite the quiver in her heart, "if it is strength and labor you require, I will take her place. I'm no child, and I can manage house and field alike." Jed paused, turning his gaze on Sarah. She lacked Eliza's fragile beauty, but carried in her bearing a sturdiness he could not mock. He studied her as though calculating a bargain, then gave a curt nod. "Fine. Better than being the town's jest. You'll do." His acceptance cut like a blade across Eliza's soul, for it confirmed what his scorn had declared. She was unwanted, unfit, a burden even in matters of marriage. The station's gossipers buzzed louder, savoring this turn. Eliza stood frozen as Sarah gathered the suitcase from her hands, whispering, "Forgive me, Liza. It's better this way." Eliza could not speak. Her throat was tight, her eyes burning. She turned from the platform before tears could betray her, walking into the road with her arms empty and her spirit hollowed. The dirt path stretched wide and lonely, the prairie sun pressing down without mercy. Each step felt like exile. She thought of home, of her father's disappointment when he'd pressed the letter into her hand, urging her toward this chance of security. Now she returned not with a husband, but with disgrace clinging to her like dust on her skirt. She imagined the whispers would follow her forever. Too young, too weak, unwanted. Her vision blurred with tears when she heard a rustle by the roadside. A figure emerged from the shade of cottonwood, tall enough to cast a shadow that reached her feet. He was broad-shouldered, his skin bronzed, his dark hair bound at the nape. The townsfolk called him the giant Comanche, though his true name, Tuka, was known to few. He stood silent, his gaze steady, unreadable, yet not unkind. In his hand, he carried a water skin. For a moment, Eliza's fear tightened. This was a man marked by whispers, treated as outcast, as savage. Yet when he lifted the skin toward her, not forcing, only offering, something in his manner quieted her trembling. She accepted it, lips brushing the leather, cool water soothing her parched throat. When she lowered it, her eyes met his. No words passed. None were needed. In that stillness, with the dust drifting golden in the sun's slant, she felt less like a discarded child and more like someone seen. Tuka gave a single nod, as if acknowledging her pain without intruding upon it. Then he stepped aside, letting her choose her path. Eliza clutched the memory of his silent grace as she continued down the road, her shame no lighter, yet softened by the strange, wordless kindness of a man whom others feared. Behind her, the station's clamor faded, but the echo of Jed's rejection lingered, braided with the steady image of Tuka's eyes. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in bruised violet, Eliza realized the future she had come for was gone, traded by her own sister's hand. Yet something new had brushed against her fate, unlooked for, unspoken. The sting of shame remained sharp, but beneath it stirred the faintest whisper of another story, one not written in contracts or letters sealed with wax. She walked on, unaware that Jed Coulter's scorn had only opened the door to a path that would test her spirit in ways no rail ticket could have foretold. And somewhere behind her, Tuka followed at a distance, silent as the dusk, carrying with him the unspoken promise that this was not their last crossing. Autumn crept across the plains with a slow hand, scattering brittle leaves through the lanes of the settlement. Eliza May Turner moved like a shadow among its people, her head often bowed, her voice rarely heard. Days after her public rejection, she had taken a room with a widow who sold cornbread from her kitchen, paying her keep with laundry and quiet labor. She went to market only when she must, bracing herself for the stares that never softened. Children pointed, women whispered, and Mrs. Hester Clay's tongue carried the tale like wildfire. How the rancher had scorned the girl as too young, too useless. Every look seemed to confirm it. Shame grew around her like a second skin. Yet often, when she felt most unseen, a shadow lingered at the edges of her sight. Tuka was there, not close enough to intrude, but near enough to remind her she was not alone. She would pass the blacksmith's yard and glimpse him lifting beams. At the well, she found a bucket left full when her arms ached. When a rough-lipped boy spat in her path, it was Tuka who stepped from the dust and stood still until the child fled. He never spoke, not even a word, but his silences, filled with quiet strength, steadied her more than pity ever could. One evening, as dusk pooled violet along the horizon, Eliza lingered at the river's bend where willows dipped their fingers in the current. She sat with her knees drawn up, the coolness of water against her skin. A twig snapped behind her, and she startled, but it was only Tuka, tall as the trees, carrying a small bundle. He crouched, unwrapped cloth to reveal bread and venison. He set it down, then pulled a knife and whittled at a branch, as though he had come not to guard but simply to exist beside her. Hunger and gratitude pried at her pride. She reached for the food, fingers brushing the rough wood of the log where he Saturday, "Thank you," she whispered, though she doubted he would answer. He didn't, but his eyes lifted, catching hers. For breath, time slowed. The river murmured, leaves whispered, and her shame felt lighter. She chewed slowly, watching the way his hands moved, careful, deliberate, shaping what into something useful. In that silence, she understood. Here was a man who spoke not in words, but in gestures that carried more weight than 1,000 assurances. From then on, Their paths twined in quiet ways. He showed her the art of reading tracks in the dust, how to tell the weight of a deer by its hoof, how to know when rain was near by the tilt of the wind. She mended a pair of gloves for him, pricking her fingers with needle until the leather softened to her touch. When she gave them to him, he said nothing, only pulled them on and flexed his great hands once before nodding. That nod was more than enough. But in town, tongues sharpened. Mrs. Clay's voice cut through like a whip. Too young for a husband, yet not too young to walk with a savage. Look at her, clinging to him as if shame weren't shame enough. The word spread. Market women clutched their baskets tighter when Eliza passed. Children sang cruel rhymes. Even the widow who rented her room grew uneasy. "It's not right, child," she said, wringing her apron. "Folk will say things. You'll never find a place if you tie yourself to him." Eliza carried those words home with her, heart pounding. For the first time, doubt gnawed where gratitude had lived. Was she repeating her humiliation, inviting another wound? She lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, remembering Jed's scorn, remembering Sarah's hand closing over her suitcase. The ache of being left behind once more threatened to crush her. Yet when morning came and she stepped into the yard, she found her gate mended, the boards replaced clean and straight. No note, no claim of effort, only the silent proof of care. And she knew. The weeks rolled forward until one night, the air heavy with storm and whiskey, Jedediah Coulter staggered from the saloon. Word had traveled that his new wife, Eliza's sister, was strong enough to hold his house, but not his pride. Men had laughed at his misfortune, mocking that he'd been spurned by a slip of a girl. Humiliation burned hotter than liquor. He mounted his horse and rode into the night, his fury leading him not to Sarah, but to Eliza. Eliza heard the pounding hooves before she saw him. She was crossing the square, basket on her arm, when his voice split the dark. "You think you can shame me, girl?" His words slurred, his face twisted red beneath the lamplight. "Turn me down, made me the town's jest, and now I hear you're keeping company with that Comanche dog." His hand fumbled at his belt, the glint of metal flashing. The basket fell from her grasp, apples rolling across the dirt. Fear froze her. Then, from the shadows, took a step forward. His presence filled the square like a mountain rising. He placed himself between Eliza and Jed without flourish, only calm certainty. Jed swore, drew the pistol. Gasps rippled from the crowd, gathering at doorways. Tuka's eyes never left the rancher. With a motion swift as river water, he caught Jed's wrist, twisted, and the gun clattered into the dust. He did not strike. He did not shout. He only stood, steady as stone, while Jed crumpled to his knees, sobbing rage into the dirt. Silence spread. Even Mrs. Clay, peering from the porch, could find no words. The air held stillness, so complete Eliza could hear her own heartbeat. Tuka turned to her then, his face softened by the lantern glow. He bent, leaned close enough that only she could hear, and whispered, low as a prayer, "Don't fear. You'll be happy." Her breath caught. In that moment, the shame that had dogged her steps since the station seemed to loosen its grip. A man once rejected her with cruel laughter, but another now shielded her with quiet strength, asking nothing in return. The crowd's eyes no longer seared her. Instead, she felt a dawning, fragile dignity blooming where humiliation had lived. Jed was dragged away, muttering, while the people watched in silence, unsure what tale they had witnessed. Eliza lifted her basket, her hands trembling, and when she looked up again, Tuka was still there, steady, unyielding. She realized with a shiver that she had crossed a threshold. Her story was no longer about rejection, nor about the town's judgment. It was about the man who stood wordless yet unbreakable beside her, who answered cruelty not with violence but with grace. And as the night pressed close, she knew with aching certainty that the whisper he had given her was not a comfort alone, it was a promise.